in the golden glow of Victorian England, where candlelight shimmered through crystal chandeliers and every breath seemed perfumed with civility. A terrible secret lurked beneath the folds of satin and lace. History remembers the era for its grandeur, its manners, its towering dresses that seemed to float through marble halls. But what it never shows is the suffocating truth beneath those skirts. To be a woman in the 1800s was to be trapped in a contradiction, worshipped for beauty, silenced for honesty, and forced to endure the most private of miseries in absolute silence. Picture this: London, 1865. Horse-drawn carriages clatter down rain-slicked cobblestones, the fog from the Thames wrapping the city in ghostly gray. Inside one of the fine houses of Belgravia, a young woman named Eleanor Wainwright stands before her mirror, her maid tightening the laces of her corset until her ribs creak. The mirror reflects perfection: a tiny waist, a high collar, and a face pale as ivory, but inside she can barely breathe. The gown she will wear tonight is a masterpiece of excess. 15 yards of silk, hoops of polished steel, petticoats, ribbons, lace. She will glide through the Duke's ball like a painting come to life. Yet beneath all that beauty lies a problem that no etiquette manual dares to mention. What happens when nature calls? The answer, whispered among servants and never spoken in polite company, is what makes the Victorian woman's world so horrifyingly absurd. For all their elegance, for all their refinement, these women were prisoners of their own fashion, their own modesty, and their own bodies. Toilets, as we know them today, barely existed. Indoor plumbing was rare, and where it did exist, it was unreliable and scandalous. To relieve oneself was not merely private, it was forbidden, a moral stain upon womanhood itself. A lady must never allude to the existence of her body beyond the neck and hands. She must never show exertion, discomfort, or need. But the body does not obey culture, and so in silence, women found ways that were creative, humiliating, and at times grotesque. Beneath Eleanor's ballroom grace was hidden a small porcelain object called a bordeleau. About the size of a soup bowl, curved like a gravy boat, it was designed to slip discreetly between the folds of a dress. Some were painted with roses, others gilded in gold, luxury disguising necessity. A lady could, with careful posture, use it while standing or kneeling, her hoop skirts concealing the act. It was an invention born not of convenience, but of desperation. In churches, at operas, even during carriage rides, women used these objects, pretending that nothing was happening beneath the waves of silk. Servants later emptied them, pretending not to notice the smell that clung faintly to the air. The bordeleau became a secret companion of womanhood, a porcelain symbol of shame. Yet, even that luxury was not universal. Middle-class women relied on chamber pots hidden beneath beds or inside furniture disguised as elegant chairs. Poorer women, working in factories or markets, had no such options. They squatted in alleys, behind barrels, or in filthy shared privies that overflowed into the streets. And yet, across all classes, the rule of silence remained absolute. To even mention bodily functions was to risk social ruin. The contradiction was cruelly perfect. Women were expected to appear angelic, while enduring discomforts no angel could survive. Imagine the layers they wore: linen chemise, corset, petticoats, hoop skirt, overskirt, bodice. To undress required assistance. To redress could take an hour. The mere act of sitting on a chair required precision. And yet, nature had to be obeyed. So women learned to twist, lift, and balance. Graceful contortions performed in silence while the world around them admired their poise. In mansions across England, servants moved like shadows at dawn, emptying chamber pots and washing away evidence of their mistress's humanity. Before breakfast was served, the air would smell faintly of lavender to mask what could not be acknowledged. For Eleanor and millions like her, every public outing was a test of endurance. Carriage rides could last hours, balls all night. There were no restrooms at the opera or in the great houses. Even when early water closets appeared in the 1840s, women hesitated to use them. The sound of flushing was too loud, too shameful, too revealing. Doctors, too, played their part in maintaining the illusion. They called women's ailments hysteria, weak nerves, or female delicacy, never admitting that corsets crushed organs or that refusing to relieve oneself caused infections and fainting. And faint they did, often. Society called it fragility. In truth, it was agony. In a cruel twist of irony, the very garments that symbolized feminine grace were instruments of torture. The crinoline, that enormous cage of hoops, could trap air, heat, and even sparks from fireplaces, and women died in flames because of it. Yet the true fire was invisible, the slow burn of endurance, the daily humiliation wrapped in silk. Servants spoke of it only in whispers. The duchess who used her pot during a royal dinner, the lady who fainted in her carriage and woke in her own shame. These were stories not of scandal, but of survival. And though the world saw them as perfect, porcelain creatures inside, they carried an unspoken exhaustion from holding everything in all the time. Their beauty came at the cost of their dignity. The chamber pot, the bourdaloue, the fainting couch, all symbols of a womanhood defined by endurance. And yet, beneath this quiet suffering, change was stirring. The great cities were growing. The stench of the Thames forced London to confront its filth. The great stink of 1858 made sanitation a matter of national urgency. Sewers were built, plumbing improved, and eventually the water closet became more common. But culture changes slower than technology. For women, the fear of shame lingered long after the pipes were laid. Even when public toilets for men lined the streets, women were still expected to hold it. It was as if society refused to admit that women had bodies at all. But in secret, among whispers, women began to question. They wondered why modesty required such pain, why dresses needed to weigh 20 pounds, why fainting was called elegance. The toilet, the most private of places, became, in its own quiet way, a battlefield for equality. For Eleanor Wainwright, standing before her mirror that night, unaware of revolutions brewing in the shadows, it was simply another evening of endurance. Her maid tied the final ribbon, adjusted the hoop, and stepped back. "Perfect," she said softly. Eleanor smiled, though her ribs ached and her breath came shallow. She was perfect, at least on the outside. Beneath her gown, hidden beneath history's illusion of grace, she was human, fragile, flawed, and unbearably real. And as the carriage wheels rolled toward the glittering lights of the Duke's mansion, no one in the ballroom would suspect that every shimmering woman there carried, beneath her skirts, a secret no one dared to speak of, the horrible truth of what it meant to be beautiful in the age of perfection. The night at the Duke's ball would glitter in history's memory. Diamonds flashing under candlelight, violins trembling through the air, laughter echoing through the corridors of privilege, but behind every polished smile, every graceful curtsy, there hid the same unspoken torment. Hours passed. The air grew warm. Beneath the layers of silk, sweat gathered. The corset tightened like a fist. Eleanor Wainwright, radiant and admired, stood in the middle of the ballroom, her lips painted in soft rouge, her heart pounding. She had not relieved herself since morning. She could not. Leaving the ballroom would draw attention. Removing her dress would require her maid, so she endured, like every other woman there, the silent sisterhood of suffering. The men laughed, drank, smoked cigars, and excused themselves freely. The women smiled, clutched their fans, and prayed for the night to end. This was the secret architecture of Victorian society, built on the suppression of women's bodies, hidden behind lace and etiquette. The price of modesty was misery, and yet they called it virtue. When dawn finally arrived and the guests departed, Eleanor collapsed into her chair, trembling with exhaustion. Her maid, Mary, helped her undress, lifting each layer carefully. Beneath the fine silks, her skin was marked with red lines where the corset had bitten deep. Her body, shaped by fashion and restraint, bore silent scars. But Mary knew better than to speak. She carried the bordeleau from beneath the bed, emptied it quietly, and returned with clean linen. It was routine. It was normal. It was the hidden labor of womanhood. But history has a cruel habit of forgetting the servants' hands and the women's discomfort. The Victorian woman, idolized in portraits and praised in poetry, was, in truth, a prisoner of appearances. Her pain was her duty, her silence, her pride. Yet beyond the mansions and mirrors, the world was changing. The Industrial Revolution had reshaped cities, and with it came new ideas. Sanitation, hygiene, equality. The Great Stink had forced Parliament to fund massive sewer systems. Engineers like Joseph Bazalgette transformed London's underground into a marvel of modern engineering. Flush toilets became more reliable, but even then, social stigma persisted. Women feared the noise, the association with waste, the possibility of being overheard. Modesty was not just a virtue, it was a prison built inside their minds. Early feminists began to see it clearly. They argued that access to public restrooms was not a luxury but a right. In the 1870s, a few brave voices, like the Ladies' Sanitary Association, demanded rest facilities for women in cities. But the backlash was vicious. Newspapers mocked them, calling it unfeminine. Politicians scoffed. A true lady, one declared, has no need for such conveniences. It was absurd, but it revealed a truth. Society was terrified of acknowledging women as physical beings. Yet progress, once born, cannot be unmade. As the century turned, the corsets began to loosen. The dresses grew simpler. Sanitation became science, not shame. By the 1890s, indoor toilets appeared in more homes. The first women's public lavatory opened in London, hidden discreetly underground. Few dared to use it at first, now old fears lingered, but the seed had been planted. The porcelain bowl that had once symbolized shame became a symbol of independence. Each flush, once scandalous, became a quiet act of rebellion. And as modernity swept through the 20th century, women began to reclaim their bodies, their comfort, their health, their voice. But the memory of that old suffering did not vanish. It lingers in diaries, in whispers, in the strange beauty of those giant dresses that now sit in museums, their emptiness haunting. To look at one today, its perfect stitching, its impossible size, is to feel both awe and pity. They were monuments to repression, cages masquerading as art. The women who wore them were not weak. They were warriors of patience, masters of endurance. They endured corsets that crushed, hoops that confined, and etiquette that silenced, all while maintaining the illusion of ease. And yet, despite it all, they carried themselves with grace that defied their misery. They laughed, they loved, they mothered, they dreamed. Beneath the absurdity of it all was resilience, the quiet defiance of simply surviving. In the end, that is the true story of the Victorian toilet, not just a tale of absurd fashion, but of the eternal struggle between appearance and truth, between how society wants women to be and how they truly are. The horror of the bordeloo, the secrecy of the chamber pot, the shame of the water closet, all were reflections of a culture terrified of the female body. It is easy to laugh now, in an age of modern bathrooms and comfort, but behind that laughter should lie a kind of reverence for the women who bore it all in silence so that one day others wouldn't have to. When Eleanor Wainwright's granddaughter would later walk through a modern home, turn a handle, and flush a toilet without fear or secrecy, she would never know the quiet heroism of her grandmother's generation. The price of progress is often paid in silence, and the Victorian woman paid it with every breath she held, every pain she endured, every need she suppressed. Their dresses have long turned to dust, their portraits faded, but their endurance remains etched in the hidden corners of history. And so, the next time one sees those shimmering gowns, those immaculate silhouettes, remember, beneath that beauty lay a body denied its simplest needs, a woman who smiled while suffering, a soul trapped in elegance. The story of how Victorian women used the toilet beneath those giant dresses is not just about the grotesque or the strange. It is about the human cost of perfection, the price of pretending to be more than human. It is a story of shame turned into endurance, endurance turned into strength, and strength finally, after centuries, turning into freedom. And somewhere in the quiet echo of a closing door and the whisper of running water, the ghosts of those women might finally, at last, find peace.